interviewing Dale Vanessen. Dale is with Market Street Mortgage and has been around a long time and highly thought of. And Dale's out in the Colorado area. Dale, before we get into your professional background, I just thought I'd ask you, I ask everybody the same question because everybody's got a different story. Basically, where you came from and how you got out into your area and how you kind of got in the business and when you did.
Yeah, I'm originally from Minnesota, and I actually met my wife in a small college in northwest Iowa, and so I was just looking for jobs, and ended up doing it. She's originally from Colorado, so we ended up looking for jobs, and actually I've never was in this type of profession. I was in sales before. I used to sell vacuum cleaners door to door.
Hey, it highly recommends people, believe it or not.
Yeah, in small towns in Minnesota, it's like there's maybe only 200 or 300 people in the town, and you end up doing is coming in and just sharing a lunch with them, and so it's real laid back. But so I enjoyed sales work, and that's pretty much how that's all I've always done. I really wasn't on an hourly work job before.
Mm-hmm.
And so we came out here to Colorado and just looking for a job, and then that's kind of when the mortgage field opened up.
How long have you been in the business?
I've been doing this now for over 15 years.
Oh, wow. It's quite some time. Yeah. And just for the record, what kind of volume did you do last year? I know that I know you knocked some stuff in.
Yeah, last year was about $48 million.
Mm-hmm.
I think the year before was about $59 million.
Mm-hmm. And primarily, do you doing VAs, FHAs, conventionals?
Yeah, I would say that mix. I would say about 30% would be the government loans, and 70% would be conventional loans.
Mm-hmm. What's your average loan amount out there your way?
The average loan size the last few years has been about $120,000.
Mm-hmm. So it's not very large. So you got to really crank some numbers to get that volume.
Yeah, exactly.
I talk to a lot of people in different parts of the country. Always annoys a couple of people when you have some of these people that their average loan amount's like $350,000.
Right.
And then it just
was about I guess 2 years ago that was over 500 loans I had done.
Mm-hmm.
Last year was over 400.
Wow. Well, for that you got to keep very busy. And as I say, before we went on tape, I know a little bit about you and certain aspects of the way you do business that I find very interesting myself, and I know our listeners are going to find very interesting. Let me kind of get on message here in terms of the business. You said you got into business 15 years ago. I don't always ask this, but I do ask it a lot because there's a point in all this, and that is when you came into the business, how about discussing your first couple months and the kind of training or lack of training that you had and how you learned that business? And I'm really talking the first 6 months here.
Yeah, the first 6 months I got in the business, I really didn't know anything about the business. I enjoyed sales, and so there was a manager, and he just says, well, just start talking to realtors and asking for their loans. And it's like, I remember one realtor asked about what is a discount point, and I didn't even know what that was. So I said, well, let me get back to you on that. And then I immediately just found out the answer from the branch manager, and then immediately called the guy back and say, hey, this is what a discount point is.
I have to stop you. You were truly at the lower rung of training here. I'm not sure I've quite heard a story like this. Usually they at least throw a manual in their face and say, get lost for a week.
Yeah, and with that, I remember I was real good at making sales calls, and it's like I didn't know what I was doing. I just kept on trying to ask for business, and they kept on asking questions. And incidentally, in that first 6 months, this particular company, they ended up going through about 4 branch managers. So I never felt I really had somebody trying to train me either, just because they're learning the business themselves. But in that first 6 months, I think I actually only closed 2 loans. One was my parents' loan, and one was a loan that we had actually broker out as escrow commitment, which they don't do those anymore with FHA. But and then that company actually went bankrupt, and so that was actually maybe the best because I was on a draw, and so I was maybe at that time it was a $1,500 draw, so I was maybe $9,000 in the hole. Ended up being that they ended up going bankrupt, and then I ended up going to a different company, and that particular company ended up doing is doing a little bit more training with me.
Well, so you had a pretty rough start. I have to tell you, because I talk to a lot of people. You get the people that get in just as the refi boom's hitting, and the first 6 months is a piece of cake. In fact, it's too good a piece of cake. But you were a little bit like some of the people that I talked to that really had it hard starting. There was no refi boom. You're getting out there. You don't have good management. There's absolutely no training, and I think it says something, even though I don't know you, to your perseverance that you're still standing here today. And of course, that's going to lead me to my next question: why are you standing here today? What did you do in that first year that that let you make it, as opposed to heading out the door trying something else?
So at that time, 15 years ago, then the branch manager, he did train me, and his whole objective, he says, what you do is, your objective is to try and set up sales meetings. So I said, that's not a problem. So I was end up being really focused on just that particular objective. So I ended up doing is going to all the real estate agents or the offices and just trying to set up sales meetings. That way I could have their undivided attention, whether that was 5 minutes or 30 minutes, and then try and teach them something that they didn't know. And so that was my objective. And then it's like, hey, as soon as I set up, if it's 4 this week and 4 the next week, by that time, after I got involved teaching the agents something that they didn't know, all of a sudden then they start calling you because they recognize your face and you had their undivided attention for 15 minutes. I'm
not sure, as I say, I do interject, I shouldn't, but I wanted to prompt you on something. It's an observation from me, being around a little longer than you, and that is, I'm not sure that would work today. I think that's become, like your comment on that comment, that it's too sophisticated, too many people going into these offices and, getting that 5 minutes to talk in front of people. I think if you did that exclusively, would inevitably lead to your defeat.
Yeah, I agree with that. The market's really shifted in the last 15 years. I know here in Colorado, all of a sudden, most of the real estate offices are closed offices.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
They really limit their sales meetings just because I think so many people got involved in these sales meetings, and all of a sudden they don't tell them anything. They just want to do is pitch their rates. And so they pretty much ousted a lot of mortgage bankers. So yeah, that has definitely shifted in the last 15 years.
Well, we're going to spend more time on that, ironically. But let's kind of get back to the early days, because you got to remember the audience out here is going to range from people who were really novices that need the training and need the hints and are looking for any piece of information to give them an edge, to people that have been around a while that are going to relate more towards the second half of our discussion. So let's try and focus on once again, the early days. And how did you learn? You said after about a year, you started getting in front of groups and talk, and you recognized you knew something. So that begs the question, how'd you learn it?
Yeah, and the best thing for learning is after I got one transaction, it's kind of like you learn by actually doing. And likewise, as real estate agents ask you questions or they shoot by a different situation, it's like, well, I really don't know, but let me do is run that by my underwriter and then find out kind of how to put the pieces together. So you immediately do is get back to the realtor, and so it's more of just going for it, and then as a case gets presented to you, you shoot that by the underwriter, and the more and more cases that you deal with, then all of a sudden you can talk to the realtor on the spot and tell them the correct answer.
Do you ever inadvertently, but on the edge, tell a realtor something that you really didn't know and suffer a consequence?
Yeah, I've gone through that as well, and I think the big thing there is that I was always honest with the realtor. So even if I maybe didn't give all of a sudden the correct answer, I immediately went back and says, you know what, I really made a mistake. I screwed up here. And the realtor a lot of times will come back to you and say, hey, I appreciate your honesty and getting back to me real quick. And so I think that was a key thing is my response time when I always tried to return phone calls within an hour's time. And then likewise, if I did screw up, I admit to the mistake and say, hey, I screwed up. What we're going to do to rectify it, or this is the correct answer.
There's a point here, and I can verify the validity of it through a comment from someone else. It was a guy named McCormick years ago. He's still alive, I think. Wrote a book, What They Don't Teach You in Harvard Business School, and one of his, and I'm going way back, in the book itself, he said one of the most incredible things that you can do, and there are not too many, he labeled them incredible things you could do to really reverse a bad situation, is to really look somebody in the eye and say, I'm sorry.
Exactly. Yeah, just being honest and admitting that, hey, you're not perfect, you screwed up, and you want to do is rectify it. They can see through that and that, hey, you're an honest, straight shooter. The early days, so were you doing almost exclusive realtor business? That's about most all my business was real estate. Even today? Exactly. How were you doing? Were you doing it the old way that I'm not sure works today? By that I mean rate sheets and, knocking on. I did some of those rate sheets. One of the things, like with those sales meetings, I wanted to do is make myself look different, stand out in the crowd compared to somebody else. I like to do magic on the sideline, and so what I always did at different sales meetings or when I was going around, I always had a magic trick to show or do, and all of a sudden they remembered you as somebody different than the next guy. God, I love that. I don't expect to hear this in any interviews, but I really like that. Incidentally, today I ran across somebody in the street that was a real estate agent like 15 years ago, and I haven't seen him since. And they say, "Hey, you're the magician loan officer." Wow. And it's like, so it really stuck in their mind. So even today, when I do different little speaking engagements or to real estate offices, I always will do is do some type of magic trick with it, and so that way you stand out compared to somebody else. Great. It's great, and I tell you, it's great not because of the fact that you did a magic trick, because there's not a lot of loan officers, let's face it, going to run out to the magic store tomorrow and buy tricks. I think the value in that comment is in separating yourself. You were so right, and I used to live in Great Falls, Virginia, near Tyson's Corner, and for many years, and those offices there, all the loan amounts run from $250 to $5, and a loan officer walks out. 10 minutes later, you could clock them. Another one walks in. 10 minutes later, another one. And so the question becomes, is how can you differentiate yourself? And what you've just done is differentiated yourself, even had a name, the Magic Man. And so I think there's a lesson out there for those of you that are listening. Come up with something, anything that will differentiate yourself. Exactly. Do you do magic today? Even you said that sometimes you get in front of groups. Do you still find that it tickles them? Oh, absolutely. I still do that, as well as if it's school groups or church groups. I actually do maybe a 30 or 40-minute magic show presentation, and you maybe try and grab somebody in the audience to teach them a trick, or so you kind of are doing different little team things for one or two tricks, so you kind of get the audience involved as well. I'm kind of wondering here if maybe you ought to head to Hollywood. I doubt it. Let's kind of move on. In kind of your middle years, let's say by the time you were in the business, 4 or 5 years, did you find that you were pretty established? And if so, how did you become established? Yeah, I feel I was established, but again, sometimes the real estate community is a little fickle. In Colorado, we went through a real downtime, and so there all of a sudden was HUD repos on the market. Oh, yeah, a ton of them. And so all of a sudden, I thought, well, I want to do is kind of go where the market is. I ended up doing is being a HUD repo expert. And so that's where anytime they had, if it was an auction or if they had these sales each week, I was always down there and trying to get that type of clientele, just because I think at one time there was like over 30,000 homes that HUD repossessed. Oh, yeah. A lot of see-through buildings, so like commercial down there in downtown Denver in the period. I know what you're talking about. I mean, didn't exist. You could literally see through the buildings. So it's just trying to adjust to the markets, finding out, hey, where's the market going, and then try and jump into that type of niche. And so in those middle years, that's kind of where all of a sudden I shifted some focus is on HUD repos and learned how to do those real well and quick and efficient. And so I actually did start putting on different little seminars to real estate agents on HUD repos.
Did you find that kind of ingratiated yourself with them?
Yeah, so then all of a sudden, you again building relationships, and so some of those relationships that I built 10 years ago, I still have those today, even though there's very few HUD repos. Now they're in the regular community, and now I've built those relationships.
How important would you say relationship selling is?
Yeah, I'd say that's so important. They want to do is, that's kind of what I look at the business is, you build the relationship for life, whether it's the customer that you're giving the loan for or whether it's the real estate agent. I want to do is build that relationship for life as well. And so it's definitely a relationship business and not having the lowest rates out there. It's a relationship industry.
When you're forming these relationships, I have heard everything from people that bring cookies to realtors to somebody interviewed who literally socializes. They're part of their social base. They have a select group of realtors that throw this person business. What do you mean by establishing a relationship, and how do you go about it?
It's a good question, and I think it looks a little different for each person, and just with priorities, it's a matter of I want to make sure sometime with building relationships, it can just consume your evenings or consume your weekend, and what I still do is have time for some other things, and so a lot of times what I did is try doing different things with realtors, if it can be during the week, whether if it's a golfing, still do is taking them out to lunch, try and remember if it's birthdays, try and keep a database that way where you can do is send them information on their birthday or try and find things that they maybe like and then try and, if it's a little thing, if it's a stuffed animal, but hey, they love bears, hey, slip them a bear, or something to try and key into maybe some of their hobbies.
I have talked about this time and time again, the value of something when I think it was a regional manager then running about 8 states, of the value of giving things out, whether it's pencil, coffee cups, with logos. I am, to this day, it amazes me no end, because I'm not one of those. I would no more pick up a free coffee mug than a man in the world. Might you have $1 in it, I wouldn't do it. But in the real world out there, it's amazing how much these people like these and appreciate these sort of items.
Yeah, that's real true, and I kind of changed in the last few years where the different real estate agents that I have in my database or who I'm trying to get their business from, every couple months I do is try and get them something, like you just said, if it's a pen, if it's a bag of goodies, or even though they maybe don't tell it to you, inside that's what's a key to winning their business. So I think of different people that try and win my business as far as if it's in homeowners insurance agents, for example. Well, the one that just keeps on giving me a little goodie or a little a pen or a hat or whatever it is, it's kind of like, boy, you keep on remembering him. So
you respond to it too.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you mentioned a database. Now, I will tell you that I use ACT 2000, and I virtually I could not exist without it. I do backups, the mortal fear that if a lightning strike hit, immediately I would become a non-entity. What kind of database do you use? Is it a professional one like Goldmine, or do you use the old cards, a piece of paper in your pocket? What do you do?
I actually do is use my assistant and have him keep track of all that. So
that's fine.
Which actually system he uses, or he's created his own. But I just so I actually have an assistant that is real good with a computer.
That works for you.
And that works for me.
Sure. When you say you have an assistant, it's not something that I focus on a lot. Probably ought to focus on a little more, because the people I interview do large volumes, all of them. What kind of support help do you get? And I'm not talking about a processor. You mentioned that you have an assistant. What does this assistant do? And do you pay her directly, paid by the company? And I have to preface that remark with that I do in all of them that I'm not interested in anything that's proprietary to your company. Mm-hmm. So, with that one rule.
Yeah, with what I end up doing is paying my assistant. I actually do the paying of him, and I pay him a base salary, and then I also do is give him an additional bonus, kind of on anything that closes. So when I get additional benefits, I let him share in those benefits as well. If more loans closed, he increases his income. Likewise, if it's overages, he shares in part of that.
Okay.
So I do is put him on an incentive plan as well, so
sure.
We're in the same boat.
And how long have you done that?
I've had him now for actually going on 6 years.
Wow. I would assume there's a pretty intimate bond after 5 years that he can anticipate your wants and needs.
Yeah, absolutely. It's he just picks up a lot of the pieces and taking loan applications, or it just allows me so much more freedom to either go out and produce more, or actually, do things that you want to do with your family, or just frees up your whole time.
I'd like to get into this. It's a little bit earlier than I intended to. But most of the people that I interview, I do not do a lot of I don't call them managers and ask them about them and kind of prep myself. I kind of like a freewheeling style, and whatever's going to come out, I try and ask the appropriate questions. But in your case, someone actually volunteered a comment about you, and kind of stuck in the back of my mind. I won't say who it is because I talked to a couple people, but what kind of came through is that you're a pretty strong family person. A lot of people in our business are. That's not so much the point, is that apparently from what I've heard, that you really make a conscious and dedicated effort to manage your time so that you can set aside weekends and sometimes after 5 or whatever for your family or church or whatever you want to do outside of the business. I have to tell you that, as you can well imagine, that a lot of the people I interview are very intense, to say the least, and go 12 hours a day, 24/7, and, we're all going to have heart attacks when they're 40. But you do your business a little bit different, and I wondered if you would get into that for our readers, listeners, because I do think there's a segment out there that would like to do that.
Yeah, in terms of, I guess what I believe God's first and most important. Just having a personal relationship. What I do is with Jesus as my personal Lord and Savior. My family is second. I feel work is third. And so I do is just really try and prioritize. In terms of, I definitely work hard, but when I'm at work, I work hard. Likewise, I do is try and set time aside for weekends, and likewise plan things with the family. I've got 4 kids. It ranges from 8 to 15. Seems like you never remember the extra day you work, but you always remember the day you maybe did stuff with your family.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I did this is actually 3 years ago or 4 years ago, we did end up planning a trip where we ended up doing is taking 4 months off. And then prior to that, I really trained my assistant and made sure he met all the real estate contacts, and I was real involved in that process. So that way, even though I was gone for 4 months, per se, I maybe didn't miss too much business. So the whole ship kind of ran while I was gone. We ended up doing a tour in the eastern United States and homeschooling and at that given time. But during that time, I think I was still closed anywhere from $2 million to $4 million a month, even though I wasn't here.
I find this incredible. I'm not sure I'm going to have another interview like that. Because it's almost impossible, or people view that as impossible to do, and of course you've just kind of proven that it's not, if it's done right.
Actually, at that time I did hired a second assistant just to make sure everything was running at the same time and not losing the service to your different customers. But then even last year, what he did is kind of plan as a family to try and drive to Alaska. So we ended up doing is taking off 5 weeks in the middle of the summer, the month of July, and went to Alaska. Just seeing again, hey, the time that's invested in kids and your family is going to live on. The extra per se loan you did, you might not remember that.
How about a little more detail, though, specific detail on what you do to get to that point? I know you get to that point. I know you do that, but I haven't heard some of the details on what you do other than you have an assistant.
So as far as when a transaction comes in, you get the listing agent's name, and what we're really doing is trying to farm the listing agent as well. So as soon as we get the loan application in, what we immediately do is let the listing agent know what the status is or if they're already pre-approved, and try and make about 3 or 4 phone contacts with him during that whole process to kind of really service them, and then do a follow-up phone call even after the closing to try and get that additional agent. So I'm trying to do is a few different things. One is maintain my existing customer base, so I have something going out to them like every other month, and so that way I can try and continue to get referrals from existing database. Likewise, I do is still try and solicit real estate agents as well, just because they still have a real key part. Even if a buyer a lot of times is already pre-approved at a mortgage company, if you got the right relationship with a realtor, a lot of times he can still sway that borrower from a different mortgage company to Market Street or myself. And so I still feel that's real important to keep that nurturing as well.
So you never give up.
Exactly.
It's not over till it's over.
Right. The also trying to do is there's recently been a number of condo conversions, and so in the last 5 years I've really become an expert at condominium conversions. And so I do is again try and find different niches in a given market and put a lot of energy into that those particular real estate agents, and again become an expert in that particular field. So you end up doing is you're generating different loans from a bunch of different sources. So if one of them kind of dries up, you kind of got a few different irons in the fire.
Do you go so far as to get Freddie and Fannie approvals and get 1028s, or at what level do you get involved with these conversions? Because I find that an interesting niche to go after.
You know, one thing what you really need is in terms of the company or the staff back. You know, here where I work, I've got the underwriter right in the same office, and kind of the processors and closers, so we kind of have a good ship. And then likewise, with our home office being willing to allow us to do allowing us to the underwriter to make some different exceptions on things, where likewise then we can do is get some maybe exceptions from Fannie and Freddie as well.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned that, because getting, especially in new homes, I will tell you a tangential story of a buddy of mine I went to Georgetown University with. Runs a pretty large mortgage operation, and they have specialized for years in new homes and in condo conversions on a fairly large scale. And they took an interesting tack. I was just talking to them a couple of weeks ago, where an obvious one where you're escrowing for lawn seeding during the winter here on the East Coast, because you can't plant grass in November, December here.
Right.
And they basically went to their investors and they said, look, this is, and he was put more polite than this, but, look, this is silly. We're going through all this, asking a builder to do 1.5, 2 times, whatever the figure is on the escrows. But the fact of the matter is, you have the value here. You have the people that have put a down payment. Where's the risk in all this?
Right.
And a lot of them said, well, we've never really kind of thought of it that way. Let's try it. And so now, because of the work that he has done, this is a true story. I'm not telling you the company, but they do an enormous amount of business with builders and stuff because they know they can get stuff waived, and some of the silly stuff that's a remnant from the 60s, for God's sakes, they don't have to deal with it anymore just because they took it upon themselves.
Right. Sometimes there's a little bureaucracy there. They've always done it that way, so they don't think anything
right.
to try and change it.
Do you do a lot of condo conversions, or is this kind of a new area?
Yeah, I've done a number of those over the last 5 or 7 years' time.
I bet you find that it kind of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it kind of builds up where you now, can go in and talk to these people with a certain amount of authority and references, because there's nothing better than reference selling.
Yeah, exactly. You can tell them, hey, these 15 or 20 different projects that you've done, and it gives credibility.
I think there's, I'm saying this for the benefit of our listeners out there, because there are loan officers, not necessarily thinking about the new ones now, but some of the loan officers that have been doing this for 5 years, that are always looking for a niche or whatever. And there are a lot of condo conversions going on, especially in some of the urban, in the Washington metropolitan area, in the suburban areas now of large urban centers. And once you get a reputation and put the time in, the first 1 or 2 are like death. I've done some condo conversions myself. I was a financial consultant to Gulf Oil, which became Mobil Oil when they owned Reston, Virginia. It's a large PUD. And got involved in a very large condo conversion as their financial advisor. And it really led to a lot of other things, even though I, died on the first one.
That's right. Yeah, that first one, it's like you're going through so many hoops and putting your hair out.
But you can really literally build a business on that. So I would encourage the listeners out there to pay attention to what Dale is saying, because it's a way to, we spend a lot of time talking about, well, how do you capture an attorney's office or a CPA? Here is another vehicle to capture business that's just sitting out there. And a lot of people, they're afraid to touch it because they don't know how to do it. Well, you got to get out there and do it, so you learn how to do it, and all of a sudden you become the expert. Right.
Just jump in feet first, and that's kind of the way with starting a business as well as even new things now. It's like, well, let's just go for it. You're going to get oppositions, like, well, then you just answer their question and find out the answer and go back to them and address their objective.
I want to talk about FaceTime. And by that I mean FaceTime in front of realtors and FaceTime in front of your applicants, and maybe divide it in 2 distinct areas to talk about. Do you spend a lot of time with your realtor base now that you're more successful? Do you get out there and look them in the eyeball?
Maybe you should do more of that. Sometimes it gets so busy there's just only a certain number of hours in a day, and so I do is try and stay in touch with them, at least on the phone, as well as faxing them some data. That at least trying to do is teach them something that they don't know. So I do is try and always get my name in front of them, a fax or an email. So I wish I'd do more of it, but just because of time limitation, maybe I'm not in front of their face as much as I should be. A lot of the real estate agents are real busy, so it's almost you got to first call them anyway to set up the time for the appointment. You just can't just drop in on them, otherwise they're usually not there.
But you know what? I find value in what you said here. I hope the others listening do too, and that is, here you're at a stage where you really don't have the time to physically get out, see as many people as you want, but I hear you using all the magic words that come to my heart, emails, faxes, sending things out, talking on the telephone. Those are 4 things right there that you specifically mentioned, that where they're not going to lose your identity.
Exactly. You still want your name in front of them all the time. In terms of the customer itself, it's fortunate that I'm able to have an assistant. Sometimes what I do is actually have him start the loan application, And so that way, at least the customer feels comfortable with my assistant if he's talking to them after the loan application. And then I would maybe do is jump in the loan application maybe after 15 minutes after the actual application's taken. So then I can go through some of the forms, the questions, the good faith estimate, that sort of thing.
Is the purpose there to save time, or is it really so that that when they're talking to an assistant, there is a bond already created and a familiar face?
And it's kind of the twofold process. One is making sure that bond's there, so that way when that customer calls in, if I'm not here, which a lot of times is on the phone or at another application, at least they feel comfortable to immediately ask for my assistant. And so that's one main purpose. And the other thing is it just frees you up with time as well. I can still be making phone calls even though I know they're sitting out there for 15 minutes with my assistant. So it's kind of a twofold purpose.
What about your, how many processors do you have?
I actually have 2 processors.
They dedicated to you?
There's one dedicated and one that's shared. And so I kind of actually, after the loan application, I introduce them to the team.
Oh, you do?
Paul, as well as then I take them to my processor and introduce them as well, so that way they get that connection. I try and do is, I really want them to do is talk with the processor if there's a question about some of that, is the appraisal in or how's the credit. That way it frees me up for time as well as my assistant.
I find this is nothing more, if we got a bottom line, this than effective time management.
Exactly.
I mean, call it what you want, but I mean, this is what it boils down to, is to use your time so you have time to, keep on top of your other business.
Yeah, with, I guess I feel I want to do is have the time for the nights and the weekends, so very seldom I'm ever working at a night or a weekend. I think one of the main reasons is that during the day it's like, hey, when I'm at work, I want to really focus on work and try and accomplish everything I can do during that day, so that way I don't have to work the nights and weekends.
It's kind of an interesting thing. It kind of comes to mind. I grew up and lived in a political town, and when I was young, met Adlai Stevenson, and anyone else that counted at a very young age was pretty lucky. But Jimmy Carter comes to mind, and not necessarily in a good way, in one sense only, and that's the fact that he tried to so micromanage, and this is well known, his time, that literally he reached a point where he was managing the White House tennis courts. If you wanted to go play tennis, he had to personally approve it, and which I'm not saying that's the reason he had a tough presidency, but it certainly didn't help. So time management really is important. These are names that I think kind of get bandied around, and people go, yeah, and but the truth of the matter is, you want to have a successful business and grow it, you better understand how to manage your time.
Exactly.
There's something else you said in here, that you introduce them to the team. Can I infer from that that you either don't like or you try and control the situation to get as many people into your office to do loan apps as possible?
Yeah, I sure try to bring as many people in the office as possible. Just to the main thing is so it can introduce them to the whole team, and so that way it takes the burden off from you. Sometimes if I take the loan application out of the office, even though I tell them about the rest of the team and have my card with the rest of the team, they won't call them, they'll call me. And so I try to do is take the loan applications in the office if possible.
Let me be a bit of a devil's advocate here, and I'm a potential client, and I tell you, I'm sorry, Dale, I can only do it at 9 o'clock in the evening. I just don't have time. How do you respond to that? Because I'm sure you get a lot.
I say, boy, I can sure understand that. And I say, one thing is I'm real flexible, and is it at all possible to meet possibly at your work during your lunch hours? That way you don't have to take any time off. I'll be more than happy to go to your office. Sometimes at night, just with having 4 kids, I've got just a number of appointments and chasing around. The other thing is, if you want, I can meet you at your work at 6:30 in the morning if you'd like. And usually, with that being the case, I'd say about 90% of them I can then accomplish here at my office or at their office, or at least not at nights and weekends.
So it's a matter of control. I'm a big control freak. I focus on this in the interviews a lot. I feel very strongly about it because in our business, it all gets down to time management. And, time management means sometimes you've got to talk to that client and convince them to do it your way.
Exactly. You want to come off that you're trying to accommodate them as best you can, as well as letting the agents know that, but in reality you're trying to control them at least in the hours of the day, or letting them choose during the hours of the day instead of at the night or the weekend.
Let's switch subjects entirely. It's a subject I haven't talked about a little bit, although I do. And I want to talk about pricing. And in more of a generic sense, I'm not interested whether your company feels competitive, non-competitive, but I do want to talk about pricing and the kind of focus you put on it. Do you feel you have to be lowest in the market? How do you handle people that have better pricing? Pricing.
Yeah, I usually do is focus on, in terms of meeting with the client, just trying to find out, hey, what's their best need and their biggest need, if it's down payment or if it's how long they're going to be in the property. And so then I do is share it with them a number of different products. Don't spend much time on pricing. It is interesting in the last 12 months or to 24 months how that has become much of an issue with the internet.
Sure.
More people have, got a call this morning saying, hey, I've got this company on the internet, and which then I explained to them about, hey, it's not just pricing. That particular person doesn't really care if the whole deal crashes at the end because he's in a different state. And just to kind of explain them that, hey, my underwriter's right here, my closers are. We'll make sure you get to the closing table with good funds and the least amount of hassle. And even though that pricing still has become more of an issue in the last 12 months because of internet.
When you listen to, so I hope you will, listen to some of the other class, I had an interesting, I don't remember who it was, but had an interesting comment on the internet, had a lot of them actually, but one that kind of comes to mind is that he does to parry that. He said he tells them to go back into that internet company and get a list of the charges, the ancillary charges. And he tells me that almost without exception, once they get the list of the charges, that he can come in with lower charges because he has more flexibility, and a lot of the charges he doesn't even have. And when it's then put on the scale, then he becomes very competitive, even though the internet companies may say to somebody, well, I have 8 1/8 and half a point, and let's say you're at 8 1/4 at the same thing. By the time it all works its way out, he's right there.
Yeah, exactly. That's that's the first thing that I say to the person as well. And then they actually did his faxed one to me. I'm looking at one here. And all of a sudden they got an administration fee and a funding fee of $350.
You got it.
So when you walk through it, then you can educate the buyer, and then they appreciate that. And yeah, usually there's all these other costs that we are flexible that we don't have those.
Everybody I talk to, almost without exception, does mention the internet, and the reason is that it's it's there. But having said that, and the fact that there are loans lost to it, most people today are just using it to become educated. When it comes time to placing the loan, there's still a great reluctance for some of the reasons that you talked about.
I've experienced that same thing, and people want to do is see a person. When it comes to financing their mortgage, because it's so big, they'll maybe do is look at the internet for a pricing deal, but they really want a person to be speaking to. They want it local, so that you can touch. I found that as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they found this, I don't want to repeat this too much in my interviews, but they found this with the car companies too, that they still want to kick that tire and open that door. They use it so when they walk in, they're highly educated on the pricing.
Exactly.
Yeah, but they still want to look at that paint color. Mm-hmm. You said something earlier, and I'm jumping over here, but that's the way I do it, when you said some of the offices are closed now. Are you finding a lot of the offices are barring loan officers from coming in or making it more difficult? What kind of degree are you talking about there?
Yeah, I feel they're doing is making it more difficult. They at the front desk they maybe say, "Do you have an appointment with so and so?" They just don't want somebody milling around just because in the past experience they know that the person milling around, he maybe interrupts somebody else that's on a phone call, even though he's looking to see Joe Smith. He actually stops at Sally's office and interrupts her, and so the real estate agents, their time's real valuable, so all of a sudden they feel that we're a nuisance at times.
Yeah, but that begs the question, you still got to get business. So what would you tell a young loan officer that happened to? What would be your advice?
I'd still do is still have them be persistent. One of the things I do is try and have them make the phone call to the particular real estate agent, actually try and set up an appointment. And then when they do have that appointment set up, then they can do is ask, "Hey, can you introduce me to so-and-so, somebody else in your office?" And that way they still are able to somewhat get their foot in the door and get behind the receptionist.
Good point. What about focusing on that receptionist?
That's another key. I mean, names are so important, and just by saying a person's name, they feel encouraged and warm, and so knowing the receptionist's name goes a long ways. And if you're dropping off goodies for the real estate agent, you always do is drop them off with the receptionist as well, because there are a lot of times you're key to find out some of that little information about who's hot in their office.
Mm-hmm.
So that's real key.
What about relationships with managers? Now, I say this; it's kind of a loaded question because where I'm really headed, not directly, but is a company that have companies that have affiliated mortgage companies, where they're trying to get as much business to the affiliated company. So I'd wonder if you discuss how you manage your relationship with managers.
I still do is explain to them that that person maybe can handle certain loans, but they might not be able to handle all of them. And likewise, I do is emphasize back on service, back with my team concept, and so I do is just kind of explain that, hey, there's that one person maybe can't handle everything, and maybe can't give you the superior service that maybe I could provide.
Do you find that some managers actively try and keep competing loan companies out?
Yeah, they actually do, just because a lot of times that mortgage company, they're either paying office space, so they kind of feel obligated that way, or they're doing is maybe they get some of the profits if it's they maybe own part of the mortgage
affiliate. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And yet, as we know, and I've reiterated constantly in my lectures, when I lecture in my talks, that technically that's illegal to steer somebody on a very direct basis to somebody.
Correct. They need to be given 3 names out. Exactly.
Do you find that you have pretty good relationships with the managers that you deal with? And by the way, how many offices do you deal with? I didn't ask you that. I maybe have, what I kind of do is categorize realtors as like an A, and a B, and a C, mm-hmm.
You know, how much they give me. And so I maybe have a database of maybe 70 different real estate agents. So to say that, so this one here is of this RE/MAX office, well, they maybe have 30 agents at that office. So to say that I'm doing it with all those agents, maybe I'm not. And so with those 70 people, if that's maybe 20 different offices, so some of the larger offices, yeah, you definitely need to do is at least make your presence known with the manager as well.
Mm-hmm. I find that when I was doing this years ago, that if you could keep that manager informed, even if they were pushing somebody else, I think they appreciate that kind of contact of, stopping by and saying hello, not being intrusive, but letting them know that you're there.
Still just being friendly, and you're not being secretive, and even though you know that he maybe is committed to this other company, you're still doing is being warm and friendly and encouraging to him, and I've had that before too, that you maybe had that relationship over a 3 to 5 year period where he's never done anything, and then all of a sudden they're real unhappy with that particular lender in their office, and all of a sudden it opened the door. Over a period of time.
Yeah, it's funny, that works both ways, doesn't it? That old saying, "You're only as good as your last deal." In our business, there's a certain validity to that, and I'm not saying it's good. I don't think it is good, but they seem to remember the screw-ups instead of the extraordinary things that you do.
Exactly.
Why do you think that is?
Some agents, they're almost living from paycheck to paycheck, so all of a sudden, if there's some screw-up, it means they'll maybe, in their mind, think of that's $3,000 to their pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of a sudden, I think it sticks out in their mind, even though it could have happened to anybody.
Yeah, I have an identical take on that. It's just that my wording would be a little bit different, and that is, in this business, if you lose a loan officer loses $300, $400, $500, and okay, big deal, moves on to the next deal. But a realtor has a lot more money on the line. A lot of realtors operate on the edge financially, and so it's imperative that when you have somebody's loan, that you just work it for all you can.
Exactly.
Any other tricks that kind of come to mind? I have one kind of wrap-up question here, and we'll be finished.
Yeah, those are a lot of them, and I'm sure there's a few I've forgot that I'm still trying to do.
Well, we've covered a lot. I actually do have one more, and that is I want to ask you about stress. The whole body language of this interview, your tonality and talking is very level-headed. You don't seem to get too excited, yet you do this incredible amount of business. And so this leads me to, this is a stress business. It's a rejection business. So how do you moderate the stress that comes into your life through this business?
Good question.
Yes, it is.
I guess one thing is, if you're always upfront and honest with the people you're dealing with,
mm-hmm.
On one hand, you don't have to really get in stress. In other words, once I find out about a problem, if it's an appraisal or if it's a roof, well, it's really not a problem. And so you immediately do is let the agents know. So you're trying to always be honest with the customer as well as with the real estate agent. I think also by trying to alleviate, I have my assistant do a number of things, and likewise my processor, it alleviates a lot of the phone calls here, which can build up stress as well, not being able to get back to somebody. And so I feel try and push off a lot of those types of phone calls to
mm-hmm.
other people.
Good point.
I think it's inevitable that you do have different stress at times, and then it's like you just set it down. It's like, hey, it's not going to be the end of the world, and all of a sudden, different times I've taking walks down the hall. It's like, hey, just get your right frame of mind so you can just still stay relaxed and not get uptight about certain things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost getting your mindset change.
I think it is a mindset. I know Zig Ziglar, when he gives his talks, I don't know if you had the chance to see him.
Yeah.
I happen to like him because I think he's so dynamic. He tells you what you already know, but he certainly delivers it. But he does focus on that and the fact that it is a mindset. It's the ability for you to be in control and not let the stress of the situation overwhelm you, and the fact that there are times of intense stress. You're not going to get around it, but you need to be prepared for those. And if you have the kind of support team that you have and manage your time properly, then it becomes things that you can take care of and prosper at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, look, I think we're going to wrap it up here. I want to thank you very much for taking the time. You certainly have brought a different perspective from really almost anyone that I've interviewed. You have a couple points. I'm sure people that are going to listen to this, when they hear your 4-month sabbatical, there's going to be some eyes popping on that one. And I find it just very interesting that you were able to do that and still crank your $2 to $4 million a month. So anyway, I wanted to thank you very much, Dale. It was wonderful, and thanks again.
Well, thank you.